everybody, welcome. I'm going to be your host, Dana Durnford. Anytime you're ready, should be right there. You can call in at 709-589-4406. We hang our shield at nuclearproctologist.org. Hope you're having a reasonable day. We're going to cover species interruption. We don't need any insects or birds, do we? According to the nuclear industry, we don't need any. And here we go. Well, let's get after it. So they're trying to convince you that the sea lion died of bird flu instead of being emaciated. And see the ice in the salt water and the dolphins. Guess where I was yesterday? We got some videos and lots of pictures to get through later. It's a difficult story to explain to those that are not initiated into it, but we try to do it. You know the A-10 Warthog only shoots dirty bombs? It only shoots dirty bombs. I got things a little bit too high. Atoms for Humanity, and it only shoots dirty bombs. Don't expect a journalist to help you. They should ban journalism. Maybe that'll be our next poll. We'll provide the documentations for the assertions. Of course, here's the two reactors of the apocalypse out of many. At the top of the buildings were multiple reactor cores. Guess where they're not anymore? The chart in the bottom is radioactive fallout after 26 days. Give or take 5 or 10 minutes. So the radiation covers the entire planet. And the official story, that's the official pictures.
Where I'm standing is on top of what used to be reactor building number 4. The whole of this building was blown apart by a huge explosion.
Claiming they're on top of a building that don't exist. That takes some serious balls, man. That's pretty amazing. And the worldwide media done that to you because it's easier than trying to explain where all the whales are dying, I suppose. You got mass mortality events for minke whales, humpback whales, gray whales, North Atlantic. I never did like those whales. We can do without them. Said Fisheries and Oceans. We don't need any species. We're still going to get our pension. 10 sperm whales die after strandings on Yorkshire coast. 10 sperm whales. And so the mortality event is not just those species. That's the ones I happen to show you. Killer whales are showing up emaciated all over the place. They eat all species. Did you know that? Hell, they even eat birds. Another adult southern resident killer whales. Well, we got the headlines of they expect 1,000 becquerels a kilogram in the killer whales. For quite a long time after Fukushima, they stopped producing, and the ones they are producing are undersized and have huge health issues. Jeez, I wonder what could cause that. The adult is showing a condition known as the peanut head. It's where the head becomes concaved. So it eats all the fat. They have a lot of fat storage, right? And so, because they can't find food and they can't really uptake nutrition because their body is saturated with isotopes. And so the body attacks the isotopes with white blood cells. And that's all species, of course. But it does that forever. It's not like a cut on your finger where the white blood cells attack it for 8 or 9 days and then it's healed. And what happens is the white blood cells displaces red blood cells. For every white blood cell you create, you displace a red blood cell. The red blood cells carries oxygen and nutrition. And you can't uptake oxygen and nutrition, guess what happens to your body? Well, we call it leukemia, so I guess you can if you try. So what happens is you're bioaccumulating, and the animals that are in the ocean, for instance, they're bioaccumulating it by proxy, right? And because it's in the phytoplankton, the zooplankton, all the way up the food chain. By the time it gets to the bigger fish, like killer whales and that. Alaska seabird continues for another summer. I think at that stage, there was 5 years in a row where they had millions and millions of emaciated common murres and Cassini auklets showing up all along the coastline of Alaska and British Columbia. Not so much. We've done the research expeditions up there, but the birds were missing. We'll explain that. Seabirds have been found emaciated and starved. You got storm petrels, fulmars, shearwaters, kittiwakes, auklets, the puffins. Would have been the common murres too. The storm petrels, we have the biggest, on Baccaloo Island, we have the biggest breeding colony, 3.3 million breeding pairs here on the east coast of Canada, on Baccaloo Island. And I've went out there year after year. We can't find them. We go out in the dark because they're nocturnal. And we didn't find any dead ones or anything. We did find some other species. We've done videos of that. Unfortunately, I'm not going to cover it right now. This story of the British Columbia, I'm just giving you kind of an intro for those who are not familiar with it. You see the emaciated grizzly bears. 90% of their diet is roots and berries and stuff like that. You know, the stuff that bioaccumulates radiation. 5 million sockeye were expected to return in spawn, but only 600,000 came back. And they claimed the grizzlies bear the brunt of it. And that's why the grizzlies are emaciated. But the biggest part of the grizzly bear's diet is just grubs and berries in particular. They can eat 150, 200,000 a day, no problem. And berries are very bad because of radiation, the way they aggregate radiation, unfortunately. Try telling the population you can't go picking berries anymore and see how quick they call you crazy. Sad, so sad, right? Because that's a quick way to avoid having a heart attack. Mysterious mass deaths of Alaska birds baffle science. We'll get into it in a minute for you. Tens of thousands of dead birds washing up at the beaches in Alaska. This was, and we were out on the research. We're going to show you that here in a second. And that's from Vancouver, British Columbia to Alaska. There's 27,000 islands. I went out there for 6 years, 4 to 5 months a year at a time. I'll show you some of that in a second. Thousands of dead seabirds washing up on the beaches. They were emaciated. All of them of the species known as the common murres. Now, they dive 600 feet all day and feed on anchovies and squid and sardines and krill. And they dive 600 feet all day like it's nothing, right? And I'll show you why the big die-off in particular of the birds happened in about 30 seconds. Biologists examined the birds, say that they appeared emaciated, that they're starving, the stomachs are empty. This is pictures I took yesterday in a snowstorm way down the coastline. And you see the little spot over there? That's a dolphin. And it's headed for the opening that they just made. They're backing up in that particular picture. We got a bunch of these pictures we're going to show you in a little tiny bit. First, I want to kind of get you to wrap your mind around why we're having this particular conversation tonight. So what you're looking at is a chart of the west coast of North America from British Columbia, Canada to Alaska. I took those boats, that fleet, and we done the research expeditions.
Well, we got the big one up.
Now, we done the research expeditions for 6 years, 4 to 5 months at a time, and the species didn't come back. I know this because I went there, and I'm going to show you the results right at this moment. It was miserable typically, right? But the pictures to your right is what it's, the picture to your left is what the picture to your right is supposed to look like. I went back for 6 years. the entire coastline, where they were coming home for many months at a time. And the species were exterminated. We had to go back year after year to see if they recovered. They didn't recover. So I was out on the ocean when this headline came out. We may be on the precipice of a major extinction event in marine wildlife. And because I was showing clearly that the species to your left were wiped out, and the culprit was easy to identify. It was called nuclear meltdowns. I'll give you an understanding before we can get into the rest of the stories, and we got a lot to cover. So we also got a poll. Is the Fukushima nuclear meltdown supposed to be, you only got 100 digits, right? Is the Fukushima nuclear meltdown's endless radioactive fallout behind a mass die-off worldwide of the species? At 29 votes, got 100%. We'll come back and forth to that poll. That poll is important because it shows you you're not alone. That the evidence we're going to show you is incontestable. It's unassailable. But first, we'll start off with this headline from the wildlife in the United States. When a bear attacks, don't push down a slower friend and run away. Because we grew up as kids, we would say, what would you do for a bear attack? They said, well, I can run faster than you, right? You said that for a joke. But somebody had to win, so they got 5.54 million views on their tweet. Apparently, Twitter didn't pay for that advertisement. Explosion of sea life deaths in Peru amid the deadly bird flu outbreak, which the bird flu outbreak, as far as we can tell, claiming it's jumping all these wildlife species, which is brand new to history. It's pretty clear this is the cover story for Fukushima radioactive fallout. Because I can guarantee you that sea lion didn't die from the bird flu. He died because he's emaciated. And so did this one. Another picture they're showing. It's 100% emaciated. It takes a long time to become emaciated for these large animals. These are 1,000, 1,500 pound animals. They now weigh something like 190 pounds, 100 pounds. And I'm going to show you a lot of supporting documentation for my assertions as we're going through this. But, I provide, in the last 5 shows, was the anniversary of the Fukushima nuclear meltdowns. I've actually done 5 programs dedicated to the anniversary, so you can get up to speed and be able to extrapolate things on your own. Since late 2022, scientists detected the bird flu in more than 100 species: ducks and seagulls and geese and hawks and owls and bears and foxes and bobcats, raccoons and more bears and dolphins and seals and sea lions, you name it. If it died, it probably bird flu. So this is absurdness because the animals are emaciated. Bird flu kills the animals in 3 or 4 or 5 days. This takes several months. So why are they showing those types of pictures? Because 3,500 of them are emaciated. 3,500. Well, 3,487. So the bird flu in August 16, 2022. In April, I was out doing another research on the die-offs of common thick-billed turs. I can't even remember now. There's 4 species. 3 of them ate anchovies and squid and capelin and small 8, 10, 12-inch fish. But the other one, the dovekites, I think it was, they only eat microscopic animals. So you had 2 different parts of the food chain spectrum showing up emaciated, and we went all the way to Musgrave Harbour from the Avalon Peninsula and talked to every shop, every garage. The birds were starving. A couple of months later, they blamed everything on the bird flu, but they never retroactively went back. All of a sudden, the bird flu showed up on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean at the same time. Now, I know what you're saying. Fukushima was in the Pacific. Let me explain it to you. I did earlier. I'll do it again and again and again. Bear with me. So the birds, the large number of dead birds found on the island in June were confirmed to have died of starvation. They were in the center of this mass bird flu, the alleged bird flu die-off. But they had their tests done separately. And the birds come back bird flu free, and they had starved of starvation. This included many species: seagulls, ducks, terns, cormorants, all along the Massachusetts coastlines. In the very center of a bird flu epidemic, they didn't go to the same government laboratory, and their results were the birds had starved to death, which is what we've been looking at now for almost a decade straight, these mass die-offs. That the state labeled the dead birds they examine as emaciated. And the consensus, by the way, for emaciation is they didn't die of starvation. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink, or the bird flu. They died, of starvation. Potted dolphins, this was from Friday. Now I found about this Friday midnight. At 5:30 a.m. I was on the road. Potted dolphins trapped by sea ice in Heart's Delight, Islington. Now the dolphins, there was around 30 of them. Media is only reporting on 12 of them. But they cover a large range of the Atlantic Ocean. But we've never had a mass die-off before of dolphins. But they live in our waters, but we've never had a mass die-off in history. Now, we had years and years and years of vicious ice flow, pack ice. Could be 200 miles off the coastline. So when the wind blows east, the ice is all packed on the coastline and just scrubs the coastline for many months. And you're talking about chunks of ice the size of your house piled up for 200 miles. That's called pack ice. What we're looking at in this picture, by the way, is slush right there, is harbour ice. We'll explain that to you. We got lots of pictures coming up for you. We got lots of stories. The white-beaked dolphin next to a rocky shore. Now, the rocks down there are actually round. They're not sharp edge. That doesn't matter, but I'm just making a point. Says the local fire department managed to move some of the trapped animals using a sling. Then to the other side of the government wharf where some open water. Well, this was the locals had said, let's take the quads and the snow sleds for carrying firewood and bring some of them over to where, not very far, where they can dump them back in the open water. Right, so isn't that confusing? Because open water wasn't very far away from them. They're in slush, so there's no reason to be rolling on the beach. Wait for it. They were unable to move any more dolphins, and the ice is starting to push into that area as well. Now, the ice that's there, as you'll see coming up, is harbour ice. And harbour ice, that kind of harbour ice is soft because they're not very far from, they're looking right, their harbour goes straight into the open ocean. There's big grounders come in there. We'll get to it. White-beaked dolphins, they grow up to 10 feet, 800 pounds. They live up to 40 years, by the way. And we've never in history had an example of these washing up, what aka stranding. They're not calling it a stranding, by the way. A stranding is where a lot of creatures run up on a beach and usually die. Fewer dolphins sighted. This was the next day, the 11th, which is yesterday, and I was down there yesterday morning at the break of dawn. Which is we'll get to it. It's a really interesting story. The most survived dangerous ice. Again, they're implying this is pack ice when it's harbour ice, totally different ice. The videos I show you will give you more context coming up. It's believed 2 or 3 in the outer pod, the other original pod of perished, were forced closer to the shore by the jagged ice. This is not jagged ice, as you'll see coming up. This is pack ice. This is not pack ice. This is slush. You're not going to get out there and walk on it. I'll show you the pictures, the videos. When you see the videos, it does a better interpretation for you. It's believed 2 or 3 in the original pod may have perished. Now, that area I just showed you was free of slush. Now, the wind is blowing on that shoreline from the north from quite a few days. So whatever there is stuck there, it can't drift off and get carried by the tide away, right? But it's coming up. So calling it jagged ice is incredible misrepresentation. But all ice got a sharp edge, don't get me wrong. But the way they started it off, where they implied pack ice, wasn't true, right? And then jagged ice. Well, pack ice will just squat you. I've seen it squat 60-foot boats like it's matchsticks. Like 45 seconds. Once the pack ice got in the harbour and the boat got scrubbed a couple of times, it's just like matchsticks. About 15 of the white-beaked mammals were first spotted in trouble Friday morning off Heart's Delight, Islington. Now, you can count them in the video. I counted 26. It appears most of the dolphins trapped along the shoreline in Trinity Bay ice on Friday may have found a path to safety. Now, they wrote this was wrote after the Coastguard cutter and Harvey showed up. I happened to get there at the same time as the Coastguard came around the corner. I had just put up the camera and the Coastguard started coming around the corner after I started filming, which was just yesterday morning. It appears most of the dolphins trapped along the shoreline in the Trinity Bay ice on Friday may have found a path to safety. Now I'll throw it right now that I believe this was a stranding, and I believe that because we've never had a event like this in all the years of the ice crushing the coastline. So they're not supposed to be here. Same as the birds last year were supposed to be on the way to the Arctic instead of dying along our shoreline. We'll get to it. With the whale, Wayne Lowell, from the Whales Release and Stranding Group, the whole world basically after Fukushima set up a stranding group for whales, was also on the scene. Britain makes it illegal to go near them, right? And described the efforts to move 3 of the dolphins to open water a little further away. Now, anybody who knows anything about dolphins knows they can swim a long way underwater. They're not like shallow, quick divers per se. Well, they can dive 160 feet or something, but they're not like they dive for 10 seconds, got to come back up. They can go a long way underwater at a high speed. And the cold ice at the surface is only at the surface, right? So when I used to dive the Atlantic Ocean, I wouldn't breathe into my regulator or my Pegasus, my full face, until I sunk down about 15 feet. Because once I sunk down about 15 feet, the water was stable. But that was in minus 20, minus 30, and the ice would form inside your regulator and purge it, and you can give yourself the bends that way, right? Because it's overpressurizing your lungs. He says they were stabilized in the water before someone suggested using a snowmobile sled for hauling wood to hoist them back into the back of a truck, where they were driven to nearby Waitway, where the process was reversed on the slipway and they were released again to the ice-free water. We'll get to it. They were released back into the ice-free water. He said others were spotted moving through a path to open water this morning, but he noticed they still have to deal with the heavy pack ice further offshore. Well, that doesn't matter. That's not part of the equation. Why put that out there? They were born and raised in the ocean. They're not supposed to be on this part of the coastline because we get pack ice in a lot of winters, right? We've never had a die-off before, so there's no precedence. So you got to look at the other side of the equation first, because there's no precedence to them dying on this coastline, which has has a 400 or 500 year history, rather, of never seeing a stranding of dolphins. Now they say, there was one in 2018 where there's 6 of them. But that's not true either. They survived. And 2018 is 7 years after Fukushima. So pre-Fukushima, we have no records of that ever happening. They still have to deal with the heavy pack ice further offshore. By the way, the heavy pack ice, and again putting that connotation out there, but this is not pack ice, this is harbour ice. And this is going to break up right away because the temperatures changed, right? Today and yesterday and tomorrow. We don't have this minus 20 wind chill anymore, right? But that's only been there. That other side that I showed you, that picture I showed you, was open water yesterday. That was open water yesterday. On the other side of it, where I'm going to show you the videos and stuff. Okay, so remember this story from 3 years ago, where they claimed they pulled a shower hose, a 2-foot plus shower hose, out of a small dolphin. Dolphin can't eat something like that, see? Dolphins are not stupid, like a dog going around picking everything up and chewing on it, for starters. I love dogs, by the way, don't get me wrong, but a dolphin doesn't go around picking up stuff and chewing on it. So a couple more and I'll show you a bunch of those pictures, and I'll play a little video that showed up today on the Weather Channel. Dolphin rescued at Heart's Delight, Islington, some still trapped in the ice. So that showed up on Friday. I found about at midnight, and 6 hours later I was almost there. They were trapped on the beach and were beating themselves. Well, it'd have to be pack ice to push them up on the beach, is what I'm going to suggest for you to think about. The animals struggle and fail to get free because of the sharp rocks. The sharp rocks. They're mostly round rocks, right? They're not like shale or something. Let me shoot through these pictures. We'll play a better video, and I got lots of pictures and good videos coming up. And we'll get through this. Now you can notice that's slush. There's no reason for them to be there. There's no big wave shoving them up. They're actually stranded. And the media claimed there was 12, but I counted 26. And see, the ice is small and round. It's not going to crush them, right? It's not what you call a crushing ice. It's not pack ice. It's harbour ice. But for some reason, they kept suggesting it had the same attributes as pack ice. Let's play the video, and you see what I mean, hopefully. See, that's not sharp rocks like they're suggesting. And there's no reason for them to be right on the beach, because it's slush. And when I show you the videos coming up, you'll understand what I mean by that. And they shouldn't let you approach them under any circumstances. There was another issue going on. And they'll do this when they'll go long distances. Now, to me, it looks like some of them might have a peanut head from starvation. You can see the outlines of them pretty. They say they can't handle it. The ice rubs up and they get exhausted. Well, first off, you can't make these kinds of assertions when I've never heard something like that before. Oh, they're in the harbour ice. There's not now. Open water is not that far away, as you'll see coming up. And they can talk to each other from 10 kilometers away. So one of them makes it to freedom, they can tell the other ones, right? But bear with me. So I head down at daylight. Well, we got rumors of 26 dead dolphins, or dying dolphins. It's March 11th, appropriately, the doomsday day for planet Earth. I'm headed over to see what we can figure out, if they're emaciated or if they're just blocked up with ice. Or it's pretty strange because we've never had a big die-off before. So it's 6:25 a.m. and it's a terrible road to be driving on, but it looks like a one-lane road. It's supposed to be a two-lane. And hopefully we meet the plow somewhere in the next little tiny bit. Yeah, it was in the snowstorm. You'll see. And the roads weren't paved the whole time. Plowed, rather, the whole time. So when I got to the coastline, after traveling about 7 kilometers of the coastline, I wasn't seeing pack ice, and pack ice is different from harbour ice. I don't see no pack ice. We're 6 kilometers away. The ocean's been wide open for the last 7 or 8 kilometers, I guess. No pack ice. The winds is blowing right on the land here. Okay, so the harbour ice was just a harbour of the bay. So it's a big bay with a lot of communities, or a lot of, it's a long, deep bay, right? And so as you go along the bay, there's a couple of different communities on the highways side. But there's also like little communities on the other side of the harbour. It's a long harbour. And so on the way out, as you can see, there was no pack ice. And so I said, okay, well, we're not going to be finding pack ice. It's going to be harbour ice for some little community on that side because the wind's blowing from the north. And it's not going to be that wide. So, because we know a dolphin can swim a long way underwater. And they're exceptional. We've never seen in history. Okay, so let's play this little clip. This is when I first got there, I think. I was trying to figure out what's actually going on here, right? I wasn't here yesterday. We didn't find out about it till midnight last night.
Oh, okay. They were in. There's so many in there yesterday. I think there's 20 something. You said there's so many in there.
They were in further, were they?
Yeah, they were in further there yesterday. And there were some. I seen one there yesterday, knackers, but I think they got in. I think they came in. You got under the ice, inside ice, and I think they're afraid to go out under it. And they were all in the beaches over yesterday.
Yeah, you seen the little videos posted in the media. That's all I seen.
Yeah, I say be more on there.
So that was over here.
Well, as far as I know, from what I looked from the house, looked like it was long here.
Okay.
Yeah, but there was one. I seen there was one there yesterday, but it seemed like the trucks and it was over. The boys who were here wouldn't know. But they were there.
Yeah, so he's going to back up, I think.
I think he is, but
okay, I'm going to play this video is, I believe, when I first saw the Coastguard coming around the corner. This is the water. Look at the slush. And that's open water right here. That's slush. That's slush, right? That's her. So the question is, why didn't they swim along the shoreline out to open water? And you can see all the breaks in the ice. Because this is harbour ice. This is not pack ice. Let me do that again. I'm sorry. I screwed that up. I'll let it play through now. That's slush. And that's open water right here. That's slush. That's harbour ice. That's not pack ice. There's a Coastguard ship coming in to break the ice out. So there was Coastguard coming around the corner all of a sudden, and they were coming at a good clip. Look at those guys. That definitely made me happy. I was hoping they would already escape, but the open water is right where the Coastguard, behind the Coastguard boat. That's the Anne Harvey. That was so awesome to see. That was so awesome. And so at the end of it, there is a couple of them going out the path that the Anne Harvey made. So he's going to come right in. And so you got a little, you can see now they were spread out. They were no longer together. The survivors, I counted around 8 or 9. The survivors were separated by a large distance. And I got a bunch of pictures coming up and little video clips. And my audio got really bad, so I'll go in and out. That's fantastic. Yeah, I'll get back to it, because I started paying attention to I was looking at how the shoreline was slush, and I couldn't understand why the dolphins didn't swim up the shoreline, right? Because it was possible on the shoreline. And because you can see the ice moving there, all the breaks, that's actual where they can poke their heads up in those spots. And so what I'm saying is that it looked to me like, from the documentation that we got, it looks like you can see one out there now, and we got pictures coming up of that stuff. I'm just going to watch this because it's only another 30 seconds or something. Then we got more videos as it's getting closer. We got a lot of stories to cover tonight, but this is we've never seen this before on the East Coast. We have a lot of pack ice. This is harbour ice. And it looks like a stranding. It looks like they're covering it up. It's in the community, so they can't escape it because everybody's using social network, right? And so they wanted to control the narrative. And this is why those stories I showed you earlier were framed the way they were. I'm going to explain to you the real story, because that's what I'm interested in. I mean, I do research, and if you watch the beginning of the show, I showed you some of that research, and it gives you a better insight of who I actually am, more context. And so I don't have an opinion. I don't have conjectures. I deal with the documentation, and it's an unpopular conversation, unfortunately, when it should be popular, and we wouldn't be in this position if we were honest. And so it's going to come right in. Okay, that's stopped. So let's go to some of the pictures. I can zoom in on the pictures. Sometimes. Yeah, I was so happy to see them come in. Wow, that was so great. I was surprised I didn't see any of the bigger seiners go out and try to punch a hole. We'll go through some of these pictures. Now you see the head just pop up in your bottom right. One of them had their beak tore apart, actually. And it doesn't look like the normal behavior where they let people approach them. They were washing themselves up on the beach when there was enough water for them to hang out in. And there was no reason for them to be that stressed when the open water wasn't very far away. It's because it's easy for them to make their way out to open water from where they were to. But let's keep going here. Now, this is my observations anyway, that first off is not pack ice. Now, he's backing up in this one. But did you see that? Hang on, let's go back. Oh. Yeah, you can see one right there in the corner. I'll come into the equation first. I'll just move this over. So you see that one there? He's right by the trail, right? There's no reason he can't duck under the water and make it to that trail. And if they're Atlantic dolphins, which is what they are, they would be aware of that trick. That would have been passed down through generations. And so that's one of the white-beaked dolphins right there. It could easily make it to the gate that the Harvey is making, obviously, right? Does that make sense to anybody? Now, once it finds the gate, it can call the other dolphins, and that's not very far for a dolphin to swim, okay? Because they can talk to each other 10 miles apart underwater. They're headed towards, I can't see it. So, you can't really see it. It's a snowy day, everything is wet. But they came in right across from where we're on to. Now they're backing out, so they're creating a nice path. And you can see some of the dolphins are trying to head, but it looks of it over to where that opening is to. Are they going to come in and make another pass? Because they open up that channel. Normally the dolphins know that a boat is a channel. So you see everybody up on the wharf up there. So he's going to back out, and then he's going to come in again the second time. And you can see we're having a snowstorm. Sorry, we're having a snowstorm as this is happening. It never stopped snowing the whole time. Now what was really interesting about this was, on the way across, I showed you a video of that. After I got a few miles on that path, I think it's like 12 miles across, and then you can take the coastline, right? I had a truck follow me. It stayed way back, and you couldn't tell if it was a car. It caught up to me pretty quick, but then it kind of stopped. It stayed back, not stop, but it didn't get any closer. And it stayed that way for quite a long ways. That was a Fisheries and Oceans, and it followed me all the way to the Wales. And I also had a Fisheries and Oceans follow me all the way home that done the same thing to me. I went a different route. It snuck up, and then it stopped. I didn't see a spot to pull over, because when I seen it, it was coming really fast. But then it stayed way the frig behind me again. You couldn't tell if it was a truck or car, but its headlights, you can see it, right? And behind, as I go around the corner, they would come around the last corner. They stayed quite a long ways behind me. Eventually, though, they caught up to me and stayed really close to my back, to the back of me. And I was a little concerned that they might touch my bumper, because it was very dangerous driving. The roads weren't plowed, right? And which surprised me, really. Well, the truck I got doesn't really care about the snow that much anyway, right? But I don't want to push my luck. And so the Harvey now right behind her is open ocean. That's not a long distance for a dolphin to travel. Okay, let's show some more pictures. So the ice is broken up. There's no problem for them to wiggle up and get a breath of air and start moving towards the ocean. They know where the ocean is. This is not pack ice. This is harbour ice, and it's not the whole bay. Is not a big chunk. It is. This is just a section. They could go along the shoreline because you can see the slush, right? And you'd be surprised how big the ground swells that are coming in. So they know where the ocean is just by the ground swells. They're very oriented. There's the harbour coming in or out. Hang on. Yeah, that's going in, I believe. Now we'll start to see random dolphins poking up, and it looked like they were trying to get up and sit on the ice, which is another version of stranding, right? It was really interesting that they all came ashore when there was enough water there to support them, which is typically of a stranding, typically of starvation. And because they eat codfish and other species, you got to realize the Atlantic didn't escape the radioactive fallout. Let me explain that to you again. So the radioactive fallout, this model is 19.5 days of the radioactive fallout. We're currently right here. And so you can see the plume. There's many of these plume fallout depictions from different government agencies worldwide. Bear with me. And that's the problem with these stories, unfortunately, is they're complicated. And you got to take your time to tell the story. And so there's one there, one up there, and another one over there in the corner. That one right there is in pretty bad shape. The Coastguard is in a lot further than the last time. So this is his second trip busting out a hole. And you can see right in front of him, right in front of the nose there's one, and a little further up is another one. I'll show you better pictures that are coming up because this is the video I'm zooming in on, right? But you can see a dolphin is right in track of where he's going to go through. Oh. Let me get back to that. But they're dolphins. They can get out of the way, you know. They're dolphins. They can dive down and come up somewhere else. They're dolphins. They can swim underneath the vehicle and come up behind it, right? If they were healthy, that's what they would be doing. That's what you would expect them to do. Now, I was super happy to see these fine folks show up. I was hoping that they weren't going to be there in the first place when I got there. I was hoping they would have escaped, obviously. And from the video footage that I originally seen, you can see another one out there, right there. So they're scattered. It was so strange to be able to see where they all washed up on the beaches when there wasn't pack ice to drive them up on the rocks. Because pack ice will just squat them and kill them by actual physically squatting them, right? Footprints, they're important. Glad you got lots of them data. Thank goodness. I can hear the comments now. Burn. Okay, let's keep going here. So these are, I got 15, 20 pictures and a bit of a video, 15, 20 pictures and a bit of a video. We still got lots of stories to get to, so. This one here was the one I was worried about because it was close enough to keep an eye on. It was, when you zoom in on the pictures, you can see that their nose got severely damaged, even torn off a bit. It looked like they were, the footage, because it was slush, right? It wasn't pack ice. It was actual slush. And you can see the discoloration. Okay, I'll bring it up closer for you. Right, so you can see the color of it. What's this one? Where is it out of the water? Hang on. Let me go backwards a couple. Yeah, that one there. You can see his snout is not shaped proper. And behind him, you can see red water, of course. But there's still no reason that even a sick and all of them should have been able to swim to where the ship was. All of them would have known the ship was going to create a path. We got another little bit to get through, then we'll get into the next stuff. But yeah, we were suspect that one wouldn't make it. And he was pretty desperate at the end. He was climbing up. Yeah, but they were having a party in the background. Here, Fisheries and Oceans. It's hard to see him through the screen, eh? There he is, right there. You hear the racket in the background? That was Fisheries and Oceans. Let me go back here. Yeah, right there. I'll center that up and I'll play that part for you again. There he is, right there. Yeah, they were having quite the party in the background. You can see one out close to the harbour and a couple in front of it. Let's stop that and have a quick boo at it. Okay, let's keep it rolling here. Yeah, so you can see him out there in the hole that they made in the clip. I think I should be able to zoom in and show it to you. Or not. But anyway, they got close. There was 3 or 4 of the dolphins that were fairly close. That was 100 feet away from that hole, right? There was one fishery officer I heard another one on the phone talking about, saying so-and-so was worried the Coastguard is going to run over the dolphins, right? But, dolphins should be able to, because there's not pack ice, right? So there's no reason dolphins can't, if they feel the ice compressing, that they can't get out of the way. But it could be if it was a stranding, if they showed up for a different reason than harbour ice. Harbour ice shouldn't have been able to stop them, is what I'm able to show anyway. Harbour ice shouldn't be able to show. So when you look at his nose, it's probably hard to see, but there's the money shot right there, basically. Yeah, so we had one of them follow us all the way down, and one of them follow us all the way home. What's the odds? And they hit away for quite a long ways. You couldn't tell if they were a car or a truck. It's very strange behavior. That was open the day before, and that's where they had stranded, according to the locals. So there is a couple out there that is in the trail left by Coastguard. For sure. I say there was at least 4 at that time. And they can
looks like they're headed out to sea.
And they can
at least
call
a couple of
the
them.
other ones, right? And tell them where to go. So it wasn't that far to get to open water as it was. But even if it was, they could have went along the shoreline where I showed you the videos and the videos from the day before showed it was slush, rather than work their way up on the beach. There's no reason, there was no like mega wind blowing pack ice, squatting them, forcing them to go up on the beach. They were up on the beach on their own. They were up on the beach on their own. And there's lots of spots for them to poke their heads up. But each and every one of them was struggling. And they were spread out over long distance. We'll get there. I'll just jump into the next stories in a second. There you go. Let me get my head out of the way. That's a perfect shot right there. But you can remember it was a snowstorm, right? And you had to zoom right in on it. It was a snowstorm, so it's going to be really hard to get that kind of a shot. I was quite happy anyway that I seen some of them going out the path that the Coastguard cutter. And so there is a couple out there that is in the trail left by Coastguard. Looks like they're headed out to sea, at least a couple of them. And the rest of them weren't that far away from that. Oh, that one that's right there seems to be now headed that way. They'll call each other, right, if you find an opening. Higher than normal dead birds, rays, and baby sharks. So that's going to be... I'll get there in a second. Let's go back to the poll before we jump into the big news cycle we got left. And we got lots left. Is the Fukushima nuclear meltdowns endless radioactive fallout beyond the mass die-off worldwide of endless species? So we got a bunch of stories to help articulate why we're asking that tonight in a poll. Higher than normal dead birds, rays, and baby sharks reportedly spotted along bogus banks. So they're equating these die-offs, dead sharks, rays, and birds, and they're throwing bird flu around. But like you got all kinds of species, not just birds. But they got to turn around anyway and throw the big turd in the punch bowl and call it bird flu, which has been a significant problem around the world in recent months. It started basically, the propaganda machine went into second gear when you had, what the hell was the name of the birds? We covered it when it happened. The big divers, they go up, and they fall like at high speed and nose down. There's a lot of them doing it at the one time. And we went out and we showed videos of the colonies of them. I can't remember. I got a brain freeze here. I'll get back to it. Which has been a significant problem around the world in recent months. Dead sharks and rays. They conflated bird flu with the dead sharks and rays that were all washed up at the same time, which was dishonest. That's being polite. Island of Death, circled by sharks, has seen 400,000 whales perish in 120 years. This is New Zealand. And they're claiming over the last 120 years, there's over 4,000 or around 4,000 dead sharks. I'm going to show you what the numbers are over just the last couple of years. Over the past 2 weeks, 2 major strandings occurred in 2 different areas in Chatham Island for a total of 477 whales. Mass pilot whale strandings have occurred in 2 different areas in the Chatham Islands. They happened globally, they said. Now, pre-nuclear meltdown, mass strandings weren't global. That's post Fukushima, it went global. They're not common. If they were common, then we would have a lot more documentation than just post-Fukushima. Pre-Fukushima would have been loaded with documentation too, right? But it's not. This area of New Zealand is not new to the phenomenon. Chatham Island is a whale stranding hotspot and a death trap for whales. It's the end of the line. They didn't. The food is not dear, so they can make the round trip back. See? So they have no way replenishing themselves after 10,000 miles. It is in the top 3 places. First strandings occur in New Zealand. Bear with us, we'll get to it. So they're claiming 4,000 whales have stranded in Chatham Island since 1901. When 1901, there was 1,000 pilot whales that beached there. But you got to remember how many whales, what the ocean was like in 1901. It was a completely different ocean. And there most likely would have been 100,000 pilot whales there and 1,000 stranded. Okay, but whatever. It's 1,000 whales, and that was... So now there's 3,000 whales left for the next 119 years. So whales won't stop killing themselves in New Zealand 2018. There's 145 pilot whales, 9 pygmy killer whales, 2 different species stranded at the same time. And another stranding, 90 whales beached themselves on Thursday. Well, at that rate, they're going to be 4,000 dead whales in no time. We're talking about strandings across the entire breadth of New Zealand in a very short period of time. Does that sound like it's normal to them, or does it sound like they're shocked? More than 400 whales beached themselves in New Zealand 2017. So it starts adding up in a hurry, don't it? 200 whales stranded in 2017, February 12th. New Zealand just experienced its largest whale stranding in decades. Again, trying to downplay it. 600 pilot whales washed up in New Zealand a little over the past 2 days. And that was February, that was 2017. So, in just a short period of time, they had the other 3,000 basically. Gray whales numbers continue to decline. By over 10,000 whales since 2016, they were all emaciated, right? There's a mortality event for the gray whales. So they used to have the numbers in 2016, I think it was 27,000. 38% died. They call it declined. As to 16,650, which is over 10,000 in just a couple of years. Now, there was all the other species, wasn't just gray whales, were suffering mass mortality events. And like the beak whales weren't mentioned in those mortality events, right? There was over 1,000 of them washed up, so they figured 10,000 died or something. Finding public, because only 10% basically shows up. Finding published earlier this year points to an ecological changes in the Arctic regions. And the birds that were on the way to the Arctic last year in April washed up on our coastline. There was millions of them from Bonavista to Labrador, to Death Harbour or Black Harbour or whatever it was. It's a long distance, right? There's a lot of inlets and fjords. The sea floor and the population of invertebrates the whales are feeding on during the summer before fasting during their long migration. And if they get there and there's no food waiting, then what happens? Well, they can't make it back. So they start showing up along the coastline emaciated. And this is one of the things about New Zealand where it's the turn point, right? Bruce Mate, former head of Oregon, so that's where you expect quite a lot of die-offs to happen, right? Is at these pinch points where the species reverse migrate. And that's true for the birds too. Bruce Mate, a former head of the Oregon State University Marine Mammal Institute based in Newport, told the News Times 2020 the strandings could be a sign that the gray whales have reached their carrying capacity. The maximum population, well, they wouldn't just crash by 38%. Right? There had to be a catastrophic event that 38% were showing up emaciated from Baja, California to Alaska, the Ketchikan. Mate's research group tracked whales traveling further north than ever before in search of food. Well, they couldn't migrate back without the protein, without the body fat, without the blubber, right? And this was true for all species. It wasn't just whales, right? All the migratory species. And the species that are dependent upon the migratory species, of course, you expect them to start showing up emaciated, which is what we were seeing. In the Beaufort Sea, the high Arctic, we know the high Arctic has also been under constant assault since the 50s because of Sellafield in the United Kingdom and La Hague in France, where we got the studies showing that the emissions from the fuel, the reprocessing nuclear fuel and missile facilities, La Hague, Donneray in the United Kingdom, Sellafield in the United Kingdom, were hemorrhaging emissions into the Arctic. And we done whole presentations for 2 hours with just academic studies pointing that out, quantifying those assertions. NOAA's assessment, which is the American controlled machine, right? NOAA, the government, notes that many of the roughly 600 whales stranded between 2019 and that year had signs of malnutrition. Malnutrition is emaciation. It's where you lost 12 inches of blubber. And that's what we're seeing through the migratory route too, right? And now you're seeing it on the East Coast, despite the fact that it happened on the West Coast, because the radiation doesn't respect... Bear with me. Radiation doesn't respect... This is Neptunium-239. 2 days later, that decays to plutonium. That takes 24,000 years to decay. It pulses energy every second for that period of time. We also call it climate change because they've been releasing it for 80 years and it never goes away. It just pulses energy every second. It was very predictable how 2020 would end up, right? Fukushima was a pulse event where you had 30 or 40 reactor cores evaporate from the fuel pools at the top of the reactors. Because they don't have a repository anywhere in Japan. Everything was in the worst possible spot. Top of the reactor buildings were decades of reactor cores and 2 pools on the top of each buildings. So each building had 2 pools. So 8 fuel pools, 4 reactors, possible common spent fuel pool in reactor 6 lost into the biosphere. This is a model of the plutonium based on flawed data. It's not based on the actual inventories. There's over 24,000 pounds of plutonium in the fuel pools. And it's hard to appreciate, but a gram is basically 100 curies, and a curie is 37 billion atoms. And a single atom is enough to invoke a illness or a disease, autoimmune deficiencies, injuries, in a species or a human, right? So there's 1,800 diseases. It's not just cancer. So, or attacked by orcas. It's interesting how they put stuff like that in there. It was malnutrition. The fact that the numbers are stranded, so they're easy prey anyway, right? And we watched them being eaten up by Bella Bella on the west coast during one of the expeditions. Killer whales ganged up on a gray whale that was floundering. So they were attracted to it most likely. The fact that the number of stranded, and they snuck in behind my sailboat when I was coming in to fuel up and get grub and supplies. That was right, that little tiny community in the middle of the coastline. That was some nasty weather, that year. The fact that I got the shit beat out of me for like 5 months straight. The fact that the number of strandings spiked in 2019, then declined in subsequent years, suggests a drop in population occurred in the years prior to the unusual mortality event. Yeah, because it started happening shortly after. Within 2 years of Fukushima, we noticed this massive spike in species die-offs because you broke the food chain. You killed off the phytoplankton, which was at the surface. Because that's the basis of the food chain, the basis of the oxygen chain, the basis the carbon sequestering chain, as every child knows. Sign of malnutrition. And so let me go through a little bit of the history of the malnutrition, aka starvation, also known as emaciated. Sick and starving animals is a mystery to the experts in 2017. Now they call it bird flu, right? It's the cover story. Unprecedented. By the way, 1,800 diseases, not just cancer. Heart, liver, lung, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, diabetes, Down syndrome, schizophrenia. The list is very long. There's 1,800 illnesses before cancer. Cancer is usually latent. But if you're bioaccumulating it, you can get leukemia if you're eating Japanese food in a week. Because your body sequesters your muscles, your organs, your bones. You got to realize this stuff gets into the bones of the kids of all species, not just humans, right away. And it starts mutating their stem cells. So in the insects and birds and stuff like that, they'll stop reproducing within a few generations. Food supplies being, and that's what we now see, right? You can't even find spiders in the woods here, for goodness sakes. They're on people's houses, but they're not in the woods or trees or bushes. They're on physical subjects that don't suck up radiation. Food supplies being killed off. Most whales been tracking for the past 2 years and not doing well. You're going to see more of it. Very sick, very emaciated. Mind-blowing die-off of seabirds on the way from California to Alaska. Every bird we're seeing is starving to death. Bizarre die-offs along the west coast as the animal emergency. Unusual mortality events. Babies severely emaciated. Parasites. Just the tip of the iceberg. Severely emaciated. Countless dead birds reported in the Pacific off the U.S. coast. Nothing will eat the bodies. The fish are not there. They're starving. All of them are starving. Alarm raised on the West Coast over unprecedented die-off. More have washed up in the last few months than entire recorded history combined. Carts filled with emaciated dead bodies. Animals sick, starving, emaciated, 2 weeks to swim, hemorrhaging. Sardines and crayfish disappeared from the Pacific. They're just vanished. Marine mammals are starving. Strandings in the past 5 weeks exceeds what's normally seen for an entire year. Basically dying along our beaches. Walking skeletons. So there's an incredible amount of documentation. Extremely emaciated. Population at the lowest level in decades for killer whales. No babies born in the past 2 years. Social structures are splintering. Very sick, very emaciated. Marine birds disappearing in the Pacific Northwest. Something is happening on a big level. Yeah, it's called Fukushima plume. Mexico suddenly bans bluefish tuna. Seals and sea lions starving to death. So many unhealthy washing ashore. Definitely a mystery. Acute hemorrhaging in dead owls and caribou and you name it. Walruses and polar bears and caribou. Very poor condition. Badly emaciated. Sea stars begin ripping itself to pieces. Now, I showed you at the very beginning some of my research expeditions. It's very difficult to find any species left out there of a starfish. There's nothing healthy. We went back for 6 years on the research expeditions. They didn't recover. Melt away from Alaska to California. Not all the way, the entire continent. Extinction threat for the salmon, loss of sardines, squid, sea urchins, kelp. Now, I showed all of that on my research expeditions. A lot of these headlines would have been based on my research. West Coast bird die-off is biggest ever recorded. Stomachs are completely empty. Never seen or heard of anything like it. Unprecedented in size, scope, durations. Unprecedented. Common and thick-billed murres, black-legged kittiwakes, horned and tufted puffins, winged gulls, sooty and short-tailed shearwaters. Avian mortality were concurrent with whales, seals, sea lions, sea otters, fish mortalities, ongoing fish famine, dearth of food across the ocean. I was on the ocean reporting from ground zero when that headline came out. Worst wildlife die-off ever recorded anywhere on Earth. And we're not just talking marine die-offs. It's a big deal. Many, many more species that are getting sick, facing possibilities of an extinction. Sea creatures sick and dying, disappearing at an alarming rate. Ocean life faces a mass extinction. We may be on the precipice of a major extinction level event. I was on the ocean during that. Amazing. Let's change gears for a second. Amazing shot of angry birds win nature in action photo competition. I'll get my head out of the way because it's not as pretty as those birds. Isn't that something though? Isn't that gorgeous? Aren't they worth fighting for? Isn't that just unbelievable? How privileged are we to have species like that? Because take a good look, you won't get to see it much more in the near future. That's being exterminated. Nuclear industry, and they're both traveling different ways on the same piece of branch. That's the alleged story anyway. I love nature. I love everything about it. I breathe, dream, sleep it my entire life. It's all one of the few things that's going to give me instant joy is something like that. Those types of pictures are incredible. We should fight to the death against the nuclear industry to put it out of its misery before it puts us out of reality. Adult male pygmy sperm whale found dead. That's a gruesome. We're covering die-offs. Might have been weakened by harsh weather due to a typhoon. Like, it doesn't work that way. Whales are not stupid. And a baby whale should be with its mother. It wouldn't have got lost if it was with its mother. What happened to its mother? And storms don't wash big creatures ashore. Right? That's a fable we've been listening to for no more than 4 or 5 years. That narrative has been perpetrated. An empty stomach. But its internal organs were intact. So it had an empty stomach. So there was another, but they tried to blame it on typhoons and harsh weather originally. So if you kept reading, you found out it had an empty stomach. It was starved to death. Insects causes more damage to leaves and reach in history than millions of years ago, study finds. We covered a study about 2 years ago, and he was building a case for killing caterpillars, butterflies, because they ate a lot of leaves, and we needed the leaves for carbon capture. Let me say it again, because it sounds too incredible to be true, right? We covered the study, the actual academic study, where they got a grant to have an argument to get rid of caterpillars, butterflies, because they ate too many leaves when they were growing. And you needed the leaves to catch carbon. So therefore, the insects were bad. Maniacs, eh? Insects caused more damage to leaves in recent history than millions of years ago. There's other things that causes damage to plants. It's if you killed a bacteria and fungus. And radiation kills the bacteria and fungus in your forest. And so your litter and foliage doesn't break down anymore. And it's on a drought. So the water doesn't get sucked up because there's no ecosystem there to retain it. And so foliage and litter and everything doesn't break down. So when you get lightning strikes, you have vicious forest fires. By the way, which these plants will sequester insects. Despite global insect decline. Now, we've been covering this for a long time, but even like 10 years ago, I was able to show on expeditions that insects were wiped out and they weren't acknowledging it. This was after Fukushima. And we done that by driving. And so driving, you know, if you drive through like heavy forest and stuff like that, normally you would have to clean your windshield as soon as you come out the other end, because there'd be so many insects, right? But we went hundreds and hundreds of miles in prime territory and only had 2 or 3 insects on the front of our vehicle. Where I'm currently I'm out on an island in the middle of the Atlantic. And so it's a better spot to be in some ways. It's supposed to be one of the few populations where the bumblebees are not affected by parasites or diseases. It's supposed to be still a healthy. Now, we know from the research expeditions over the last couple of years, you won't find the bees or the wasp or ants, for instance, out in the forest. You find the flowers, but you weren't finding the insects. But normally you would check a spider web to see what insects were in an area, and you can't find that. They're on houses, but you can't find it in the forest anymore. And you don't see fish jumping down here, for instance, right? There's no insects to jump after, right? And so mosquitoes, which are feeder insects, they feed frogs and dragonflies and all kinds of species, fish and everything else, will proliferate because they don't have their normal enemy, which is like insect-eating birds. And this is why you see spiders on people's houses, because the insect-eating birds were decimated. But the seed eaters, they're not so bad. They're not doing that good, but you'll see them, but you probably won't see insect-eating birds very often, because they bioaccumulate a lot of radiation by eating insects. The unprecedented increase in insect damage on leaf matter could pose negative effects on plants. And then particularly insects that are doing it, their predators are not around. That's why there's an explosion of the population. And because the plant's leaves, well, the tips will get air, like pine needle tea. You want to stop drinking that, because you use the tips of pine needles, and pine needles, the tips are now radioactive. That's why the spider webs are not tied onto it. So it's a good way to get leukemia. Because a lot of people used to drink that for tea. Unprecedented increase in insect damage on the leaf matter could pose negative effects on plant productivity and forest health. Now, the problem with the forest was the radioactive fallout is sucked up by the roots and everything else, and re-liberated too. You get radioactive pollen. But what it ended up doing was damaging, like Chernobyl was showing, it damaged the fungus and the bacteria. And so the plants need that to stay healthy, right? That's the very basis of the ecosystem is the fungus and the bacteria. You can't have, flora and fauna without the fungus and bacteria too. A postdoctorate researcher with Humane Climate Change Institute. And of course, climate change is the cover story. They knew about radiation, how it affected the climate a long time ago, and they had to build a cover story. And so they need to blame your tin cans, your pop bottles, your cardboard, which, 15 of the world's biggest ships, container ships, produce more pollution than all the cars on the planet combined. There's 90-something thousand of them on the ocean at any given time. That's equal to 4 trillion people on the planet each day. I can still breathe the air. I can still drink the water. So if you really want to go after the biggest polluter, you would go after the big container ship industries. Because they burn the stuff left over, the bunker fuel, so to speak, from the petroleum production. However, researchers believe widespread change influenced by human activity, believe is the key word here, such as the rate of global warming. Now, global warming kicked into second gear after post-Fukushima, right? And because the planet had a pulse, and the entire planet was covered in a radioactive plume. This model is 20 days, I believe. or 26 days or something. No, 21 days. This is April the 1st, 2011. This is 21 days later. So this is a plutonium-239. That's the worst plume imaginable, covering the whole planet, based on venting. It's not even based on the actual nuclear meltdown. We got a poll tonight I'd like to put your attention towards. Is Fukushima nuclear meltdown's endless radioactive fallout, because this is a perpetual machine, this is what a nuclear meltdown is, a perpetual disease factory, behind mass die-off worldwide of the species? You got to realize I'm limited to 100 caricatures in these polls. And so sometimes I got to leave out a letter or to get in that. A team has shown experimentally that hoverflies migrate during the spring. Species include migratory butterflies and moths, which are pollinators, by the way, such as the painted ladies, hummingbird, hawkmoth, but the majority of the rivals were hoverflies. And hoverflies look like little carpenter bees, right? But they're actually hoverflies. You see them hovering. The bees. Analysts of wind conditions reveal the insects most likely flown across the channel from western France, 200 kilometer distance. So when France's La Hague reprocessing facility, the radiation has no problem making that trip. Sat in a field on the beautiful isle of Sicily, I could hardly believe it. Nearly every single hoverfly we released flew purposefully north, as if pulled by a magnet. On all occasions, the mean direction was to the north. So the hoverflies were migrating. That's pretty impressive that a little hoverfly can go 200 kilometers, but a dolphin couldn't go half a mile. How high can insects fly? That was another thing to think about. Insects superhighway to the alpine bumblebees. Just how high can an insect go? 3.5 kilometers alpine bumblebees were living above sea levels. They moved their wings in a wider arch in thin air up there, right? A laser-based system made from off-the-shelf equipment could rid farms of invasive cockroaches. Well, you know what they say, everything's better than chemicals. A laser-based system made off-the-shelf equipment could eliminate you too in the near future for invasive cockroaches. Why not? It won't take them long to scale it up to get rid of you and your neighbors. A new laser system combined laser light with artificial intelligence to detect and eliminate cockroaches. It relies on the machine vision and 2 cameras to map the cockroach's position. The laser can target the insect and determine its movement. It's just, if you scale it up, it's a military machine all of a sudden, right? And don't think for a second they're not going to produce that. Insects are essential to successful plant life. Yeah, so is fungus and bacteria, by the way. If we do not have pollinators, crop plants cannot produce their fruit or grain, and we don't have food. World Wildlife Fund, who I have zero respect for, animal population declined by up to 94%. They say the worst affected regions are the Caribbean, Latin America, which has seen a decline of 94%. That's the last 50 years, you know, since just after they started nuclear weapons testing. Fisheries worldwide on the brink of a collapse because of overfishing. Or is it because of Fukushima radioactive fallout? This model is based on 6 years of radioactive fallout, radioactive emissions directly into the ocean from a German institution. This model is based upon 16 days of radioactive fallout by the government of France. So after 16 days, This is what the model looks like for radioactive fallout. It covers the entire planet and breaks the food chain right away. See? All right. The brink of collapse caused by overfishing and other threats. But what about the other threat is Fukushima. It's not, now overfishing is true, right? Don't get me wrong. But you can't ignore Fukushima. It's a fatal mistake not have that in the equation. There's a massive, massive decrease in species which are critical both for the ocean ecosystem, food security for billions, and the ocean resilience, but there is a limit. The reports the population of fish, marine mammals, birds, reptiles have fallen 49% between peak nuclear weapons testing to endless radioactive fallout, which happened in 2011. Climate change, which is nuclear testing. Because think about like the taser bomb that the former Soviet Union detonated, 50 kiloton, or 50 megaton, was equal to 3,800 Nagasaki-type bombs, plutonium bombs, going off at the same time. So if Russia and China fired 1,900 Nagasaki-sized 15 kiloton weapons at each other, would that be a nuclear war, a catastrophic nuclear war or not? So the nuclear weapon testing was a nuclear war. And when you say there's only 2,200 bombs detonated, like just one of them was 3,800 nuclear bombs at the same time. Castle Bravo was 1,000 Nagasaki's at the same time. It was 5,500 square kilometer lethal, or miles, square miles, 5,500 in the ocean, airborne, 5,500 mile lethal plume. If you're in the plume, you die. World marine fish catches dipped 79 million tons in 2012 from 82 million in 2011, according to Degenerate Scum United Nations, who shouldn't exist. New research shows how lockdowns impact wildlife around the world. This is another interesting one that since the scamdemic coronavirus, which is a pandemic, we got a lot of studies where they were hoping the species would recover if they locked everybody up and got rid of all transportation. That's basically what they were up to, but how do you do it, right? It's interesting how the world really works. Last year, Nicole Coper, University of Manitoba conservation biology professor, just great, led a research team found most birds in Canada and the United States increased in human-dominated areas as people took shelter during the pandemic. Of course they did. Birds responded to lockdown in the United Kingdom. Was the pandemic beneficial for birds? Now, we've seen that these kind of studies in all kinds of communities. It was almost like they were paid just to do that study. They didn't come up with it on their own. They were commissioned. The research found that popular lockdown activities, like visiting parks or spending time in backyards, infringed on the birds that shared the spaces. And we found that largely the animals, they responded positively in the sense that when humans stayed at home, they saw more increases in birds. And in UK, they found a very mixed effect. Well, this is way into the die-off already, see? It's 8 years into the die-off. We didn't see it largely being birds increasing in number. We saw a decrease in numbers. The research team found that even common species like blackbirds, European robins, adjusted their behavior when dealing with the change in human activities. The species were detected in fewer numbers when people spend more time at home. So far, this is a useless study, isn't it? Possible reason for decrease in some birds in the UK made up the fact that when people and pets spend more time in the yards, it's disruptive for the birds. Yeah, they not like they can fly away somewhere else, you know. When birds are going away to work, we have an empty yard the birds can use, and then all of a sudden there are... people don't live on every square inch of land, okay? So the study, if is almost like it's assuming that people live on every square inch, and that's the only spots the birds can hang out. We can impact the birds' wildlife in many ways. This draws attention to the fact that humans, we are not just separated from nature, we're part of nature. And so whoever done that study should be barred from ever doing a study again. Billions of snow crabs, which live on the ocean floor, where all the radiation gathers up, near Alaska have disappeared. Well, because like I say, over generations it sterilizes them, right? And then all of a sudden they stop reproducing. Each generation, you start to see effects trickling down. And then all of a sudden the eggs are mostly sterile. And in fact, on the research expeditions, that was one of the few things that I found was crabs, because you would turn over rocks, right? There was nothing else there. The 7,000 highly visible species were no longer there. Climate change, which is radioactive fallout for 80 years, overfishing, and bycatch issues are resulting in a novel case within the fisheries sector concerning occurrence that is expected to becoming more prevalent in the coming years. No, this was overnight. This was like, where's the crabs? Billions of crabs are missing. For the first time in history, the Alaska Board of Fisheries, North Pacific Fishery Management Council, canceled 2022-2023 snow crab harvest due to concerning low population. The Bristol Bay red king crab harvest was also cancelled for the second year in a row. The crab population plummeted from 8 billion in 2018 to 1 billion in 2021. That's a crash. Right, that's over 80% crash. Because you sterilized them in increments over a decade of radioactive fallout, right? Billions of snow crabs are missing. Some say the situation is similar to what happened to Newfoundland, where I'm currently doing research. And the province is pretty dependent upon that to employ a lot of people. Unfortunately, radiation has no mercy. In fact, the pattern looks very similar to what happened in Newfoundland with the cod collapse. Well, the cod collapse was because of Sellafield, United Kingdom. Even today, is still hemorrhaging 8 million liters a day, each day, that was poured over mixed oxide fuel reactor core. And that hemorrhage that's what's going into the Atlantic that they emit to. But this is stuff that's going over a reactor core. So it's curium isotope's biggest byproduct of the radiated fuel. And curium, you need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for plutonium. So it's a very nasty, it kills all the big old dogs and puppies in all the research papers that I've seen, and I've seen way too many. Argentine's Patagonia, experts determine cause of whale death found on the shores. There's a sperm whale. They just had another 14 wash up in Australia, right? All of them were emaciated. Experts have determined that the cause of the recent death of 30 whales in the Argentina province of Chubut was an algae bloom referred to as red tide. That the finding of the dead animals took place between late September and early October. And they also found penguins and seabirds and sea lions died from the same cause. 26 were adult, 19 were females, 2 were males, and the remaining 5 could not be identified. Although the records in the world of poisoning and death of marine fauna by ingestion of the same paralyzing biotoxins were found in the bodies of the whales that died at the peninsula of Valdez, the scarcities of studies and knowledge of the organisms due to the fact that they're not traditional vectors of poisoning in humans makes the work of scientists more complex. Well, it's like the death of the dolphins here. We were down yesterday, and this was a stranding. This wasn't pack ice. They had open water not very far away from them, and they had a slushy coastline. They could have swam out of there. And where they were, they didn't have to beach right, to be stranded, aka stranding, they didn't need to be up on the beach because it was slush. They could have stayed in water to take the pressure off their organs, right? Due to the difficulties inherent, and they don't chase each other up on beaches. We know this from years and years and years and years and years of covering this. The lethal doses of the biotoxin for large whales, such as southern right whales, are unknown because that's not how it works. They're air breathers. And they know toxins, right? They breathe air. They don't breathe seawater. The investigation determined the reason for the deaths of the whales peninsula were carried out by the southern right whale because, again, right, when you start naming all of these institutes, and you start looking a little deeper, it's always the same narrative that you end up hearing, right? That ultimately gets debunked anyway. Those studies are limited to the 6 whales that were best preserved, all of which were found in advanced states of decomposition on isolated, difficult to access beaches. Contain content in the digestive tract indicated that they recently fed prior to their death. Recently fed, which is an incredible statement. And we see that a lot of times. Oh, well, the whales weren't emaciated. Why would you say something like that? No species showed evidence of injuries, traumatic wounds that would explain their deaths. Right? So there's these seeds of doubt. You got to put Fukushima into the equation. This is an emaciated whale. A second humpback whale, and there's a mortality event for humpback whales. And the majority of them that shows up are emaciated. And if they die at sea, they're floating around. It's pretty easy to get hit by a ship. Because they die, there's so many of them dying, right? And the 4 whales since May of that year. It's the second humpback whale carcass on the coast and the 4th since May. That's emaciated anyway. A rare beak whale washed up near Jug Handle. And July, a sperm whale was dead in the cove. It was less than 2 months ago when another humpback whale. So you got 3 different species in the same area washing up dead. Probably got nothing to do with, like, that sperm whale is emaciated. It's got a peanut head on it, for good sakes. Dead sperm whale beached. New Zealand's a hot spot for mammal strandings. Now it's more than 5,000 strandings of whales and dolphins recorded around the coastline. No, it's the turning point where they migrate up, right, and then they feed there, and then they start their migratory trip back to Mexico, right, where they feed again. And so the last one I told you was 4,000. This one is 5,000. But the majority of them are since Fukushima. Right? And there's huge numbers of the strandings each time. In a 2-day period, they found 600. You usually only find 10% on top of that. Suspected blue whale, so they don't use knowledge like that for some reason, but they use the other stuff where they should know stuff like that. Suspected blue whale washes up dead, rare occurrence. And we can't really get a good view of it, but it does look emaciated to me. It's quite a remarkable spot to find a blue whale or a fin whale. Emaciated orca had rotting teeth and 1 plastic sheet in its stomach. 1 plastic sheet. Well, in desperation, that's what we're seeing, and they eat a bit of plastic, but there's never nothing else there. But it had no bearing on the cause of death. So why put that in the headline, right? There was no food remains in the stomach. Surfer discovers rare strap-toothed beaked whale carcass on a popular north-southwest Australian beach, I think it is. It's rarely seen, because they're deep divers, they're never close to land. 2 tusks at the bottom jaw. Wow. It definitely doesn't look like it was healthy. Of course, why is the animal washing up on our shore? Is there any evidence of a disease? Might find anything which indicates that there's you got to blame human interference right away. Australia. What do they eat? They got to big whales. They eat primarily on squid. We know squid has been decimated by the radiation fallout. Stranding kills 500 pilot whales near New Zealand. What was the date on that? That was a couple of years ago. 250 whales stranded on Chatham Island on the 7th. 240 were later found on Pitt Island on the morning of October 10th. Researchers predict climate change ravage on the global ocean passageway will increase strandings. No, this is radioactive fallout. There's climate change. It's 80 years of splitting the atoms. So every fuel pool worldwide is splitting atoms. So instead of boiling water for 1 million homes, it's splitting the same atoms they're releasing into the environment. They're pulsing energy every second, almost at the speed of light. After 80, and it never goes away. So after 80 years of producing it, now because you have so much waste splitting the atom with no containment, everything is vented. Scientists warn of insect apocalypse, and again the word climate change is invoked. Insect apocalypse will have a radical effect on the environment and humankind, and really disrespect the Australian academics and nuclear proponents. An international study on the future of insects has found the loss of insects will drastically reduce the ability of humankind to build a sustained future. What we've seen is a decrease of all of these species post-Fukushima meltdowns. A growing body of evidence, many population insects decline rapidly in many places. There's profound concerns with like an emerging insect and apocalypse being increasingly used by the media. Even some scientists describe the phenomenon. Loss of insects works its way up the food chain and may already be playing an important role in the widespread decline of their consumers, such as insect-eating birds. So they're trying to blame the insect-eating birds' decline on the so-called loss of insects, but both of them are devastated by radiation. The insects are sterilized now over a decade, stop reproducing, and the birds, same thing, except they were poisoned. They have leukemia, and that's why they're not producing. That's why their hatchlings are dying in the nest, right? And we've seen lots of studies showing that. Second juvenile humpback whale in 6 weeks washed ashore in Fort Briggs. Second juvenile in 6 weeks. That's clearly emaciated. He said the whale blubber was thick, suggesting it was well fed and did not die of starvation. That's the strangest comment in history every time I see one of those. Oh, no. Whale blubber was thick. It didn't die of starvation. Don't listen to Durnford. Fearmongering. The whale appeared well fed at the first one. The other one is lots of blubber. Didn't die of starvation, Dana. Leave him alone. That whale also appeared well fed. That's the strangest statement imaginable. Yeah, because all the other whales are emaciated, right? Not overly thin, not emaciated. No, their parents were. And they died. And I had 14 sperm whales 6 months ago wash up in Australia, which meant about 140 died because only 10% will show up. To a more suitable inspection point before the whale sinks when it reaches shore. Climate change, aka radioactive fallout, may kill 65% of insects on Earth, says another study. Human-made changes, which is anthropogenic man-made radioactive fallout. The journal Nature Climate Change. You should never be... you got to realize Elsevier, Spring, and Wiley, the three biggest publishers, have over 20,000 journals, right? And they create these particular journals so they can brainwash a certain demographic of the populations in certain colleges will get the studies for free, right? Instead of having to pay for them to rent them. Climate-mediated shifts in temperatures fluctuations promote the extinction risk. Well, you have these invisible plumes like this here. You can't see it or smell it or taste it or hear it or feel it or touch it or pick it up or throw rocks at it. But there's a plume. And it's pulsing energy at the speed of light every second for millions of years. I had a guy yesterday in a comment section of a story article by Dave Sweeney from Australia. And I put in some of the headlines that I covered on the last show, like 20 headlines or something. You know what I'm doing, right? And he came back. He said, "Well, 220 million atoms of iodine-129. Well, once they pulse, they decay to xenon, and xenon is not an emitter." So he was trying to pretend that the iodine-129 with a 15 million year half-life only decayed once. And then it disintegrated to the xenon-129. It doesn't work that way. It pulses energy every second for 15 million years, and then 50% of it decays to xenon. But the other 50% doesn't. And it does that 10 times. So the whole decay of that particular isotope is 150 million years, not a single pulse of energy. It was really, and this was in Australia, pro-nuclear scum, right? But it was a really interesting reply. I replied appropriately, and I disrespect them for doing that, obviously. It was unclear what a mass die-off happened, but that it was likely due to natural causes, authority says. 2,500 seals found dead is not natural causes. It's unclear, so therefore it must be natural causes. Well, they don't die of natural causes like that. I wish they did, but they don't. There's no signs that they were killed or caught in fishing nets. Well, that one there is emaciated as you get. They're emaciated too. You didn't spot any pollutants. Whales, tails, and trails. Can dead whales be as much of a tourist draw as live ones? Well, if that was true, it would be pretty morbid. There'd be a killing to be made right now until the whales are all dead, which won't be that long. Can dead whales be as much of a tourism draw? Whoever writes stuff like that, well, that's CBC Canada figures. They always hire scoundrels, don't they? Another dead whale washes up in the New Jersey shore. New Jersey? How many whales have washed up in New Jersey in the last couple of months? Holy shit, eh? That's a humpback whale there, I think. Even 30 feet long, the whale is considered juvenile, believed to be less than 10 years of age. Dead whale had no sign of trauma. Looks like it's emaciated to me. You got to blame it on a human. It can't die of anything on a human. Look, might be hit by a vessel or entangled in fishing gear or something by a human. They're far more common now. They were once very rare. We used to have humpback once every 600 days. Now we see one a year. Yeah, well, pre-Fukushima, we probably never seen none. Over the last decade, what you're seeing might seem like it's normal now, a decade later, because it's happening all the time, but it's not normal. The National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, aka NOAA, has said there have been 67 large whale strandings in New York Bright area since 2017. That's not normal. That's a mortality event. Alaska oil tankers must adopt a whale strike reduction measures. Well, you can't, like, the problem is the whale is dead. That one there is emaciated and dead. But with a dead whale, it's easier for a ship to hit it. It's usually pretty hard for a ship to hit a whale, see? Gray whale mortalities, minke whale mortalities. 70 emaciated gray whales. 70. No, they weren't, Dana. They probably had plastic in their stomach, Dana. Whenever they got plastic in their stomach, there's nothing else there. And the plastic never killed them. Well, if you read the whole story, that's what you start to find out. Can dolphins get Alzheimer's? Apparently so. Radiation will give you Alzheimer's. Why wouldn't it give an air breather like a dolphin, I wonder? Scientists find markers of dementia and Alzheimer's. Yeah, because that's one of the 1800 diseases from radiation is Alzheimer's dementia. Dropping dead of heart attacks is another one. We're seeing clusters of people dropping dead with heart attacks down here over a week or two period. Like clusters of people under 50 years old doing odds and ends out in the shed, out in the garden, walking around. Just pop. We've never seen that pre-Fukushima. This doesn't definitely prove the sea creatures can get Alzheimer's, says the crazies, but it does offer a possible explanation why the entire pod of dolphins, known for their ability to navigate the ocean, except for Newfoundland, of course, since Fukushima, sometimes end up trapped in dangerous shallow water. That's called strandings. Isn't that trapped? You don't get trapped in shallow water. It's always very distressing dealing with these sorts of mass strandings. The sick leader theory, where you follow the donkey, is an interesting, important question for future work. Well, you got to have a precedent to make those types of assertions, okay? It has to be recorded in history pre-Fukushima for it to be acceptable to be normal now, and it's not. Study does lend credence to what's known as the sick leader. Nobody actually worked out exactly why these mass strandings, this wasn't happening pre-Fukushima. It would have been happening everywhere. There was another one where they talk about sonars are doing it, right? But we've been using sonars since the 40s, and it was brutal back then. There was no checks and balances at all back then. We didn't see the mass strandings. It would have been everywhere. It would have been symmetrical because that technology is prolific, right? Nobody actually worked out why the strandings and many of the animals appear healthy. The lead animal may be sick. Again, these are conjectures. There's no actual hard evidence to back up that type of assertion. But Alzheimer's dementia and autism and schizophrenia is a popular illness for radiation in humans and animals. And so mammals that breathe air, are social, might very well have those same attributes. It's a theory and a hypothesis, but you can't back it up with any kind of facts. It shouldn't have been printed. It's not even a conjecture. It's silly. Dolphins in captivity have excellent memories. Well, not the ones we seen yesterday. Comments, they were beat. They were sick when they got there. It wasn't the ice that made them wash up. They washed up on their own. Because the water wasn't pack ice, it was slush. They had no problem surviving in that environment. Dolphins are teaching each other how to use shells to catch and eat a fish. So they're very intelligent animals. Using shells to catch a fish, right? Which means these are not stupid creatures. They pass it on, and they can talk to each other over long distances. Up to 10 miles or something, there's no problem for them to talk. So if one of them escaped the ice yesterday, they would just call the rest of them, right? And say, hey, go this way or go up. They could have went along the shoreline where I was to. For sure. There was lots of places for them to get to the ceilings. So why did they put that picture there? Because their ego is that friggin' big. These tiny fish may be self-aware as chimpanzees and dolphins, which was showing that little small fish will recognize themselves in the mirrors. You have to rethink everything. You remember the story we covered probably 9 years ago maybe, of chimpanzees that were huddled around each other because the caretakers, there was one that died, and there was like 40 of them or something. One had died, and the caretaker had put the dead chimpanzee in a wheelbarrow. And the other chimps all gathered up looking at the dead chimpanzee as if they were mourning, and doing what is known as mourning among them. They recognized the dead animal, and they all exhibited sadness, and it was remarkable. So they learned what their reflection was, according to the study. I think that's remarkable. Dolphins can recognize each other's whistles and their pee, new study finds. This is a video of a crow flying along with a car. Oh, it's not a video. It comes up later. My apologies. I'll play it later. It's a video of a crow flying with a car for about 40 minutes. Hypoxia-induced factor alpha in fisheries. And so, if you kill the phytoplankton, which is the biggest oxygen producer on the planet, you'll create a lot of hypoxia in the ocean. But from decades of dumping nuclear fuel into the Atlantic and the Pacific, many other oceans, you're going to create all these dead zones in the ocean. And as luck would have it, a lot of the known hypoxia areas, dead zones in the oceans, are ex-nuclear dump sites and nuclear detonation waste sites. And aquatic hypoxia worsens on a global scale, because you kill the bases of the food chain, the phytoplankton, the bases of the oxygen chain. Bees can't get COVID. Whoever done that should never be allowed to speak in public again. But just for the fact that they've done a study like that. But other virus infections may mean fewer babies. Well, radioactive pollen is the best way to exterminate the bee population and the pollinators, like the moths and that. Dirty scumbag to do a study like that. What a dirty thing to do. What a low-life, dirty... I lost faith a decade or more ago on academics. Totally lost faith in how quick they are to sell your soul so they can make a book. It's just horrific. Radiation is a catastrophic event for bees, by the way. The queen will ingest the vaccine granting offspring's immunity. Yeah, there's no vaccine for anthropogenic man-made radioactive fallout. I'm not sure what the hell this is, but let's go through it. It's cute by the looks of it. I don't know. Bear with me. Yeah, I got no idea. My apologies. Must have been somebody. I missed this part of that story for some reason. Extremely rare snowy owl sighting transfixes a California suburb. Oh, is that what it is? Extremely rare snow owl. So they collected his poo and other stuff and dissected it all. Why was it? That's an emaciated whale. No pause in wind farms. So trying to blame wind farms for the whale current die-off we see going, because there's new wind farms going up. That's the nuclear industry. They hate everything. Like, you should be using geothermal. I don't know why you're using wind when you can use geothermal. Geothermal's everywhere. It's obsolete technology. And there's many examples of it worldwide. It's a growing fad. They expect it to be a $50 billion a year industry in the near future for just drilling bits. $50 billion a year for drilling bits alone for geothermal. So it's going to explode. 50% of the planet will be geothermal in the next 15 years or so. it's starting to take off, and we've been pushing it for a long time. Geothermal is 24/7 guaranteed. It's obsolete technology, simple, stupid, and cheap to do. And there's around 20 ways to store energy. Batteries is stupid. If you want renewables to fail, you use batteries for storage, right? No pause in wind farms. Trying to blame wind farms for mass species die-off. There is no new low for the nuclear industry because they are the definition of low. But if wind farms were killing mammals and whales, then we would see that symmetrically worldwide, not just off the East Coast, where for the last decade there have been unusual mortality events of all kinds of species of whales. Right, so it's a despicable, and now that's out there everywhere. They're actually having debates about this. New Jersey government about whales dying from wind farms. So we de-evolved to the irreparable world of idiot machines. New Jersey governor said Friday doesn't think undersea preparations for offshore wind farms should be halted because of a spat of whale deaths in New Jersey, New York. Well, that's been going on for quite a few years before the wind farm showed up. That's the nuclear industry. When you hear that kind of narrative, that's Michael Schellenberg, Rod Adams, and people like that, Geraldine Thomas, the scum of the scum. And they say, well, the solution is nuclear. And the solution, if you want to exterminate a planet, is a nuclear power plant. It's despicable, but hey, that's the norm, right? We're talking nuclear. It's hard to believe the death of 7 whales on the beaches is just a coincidence. No, it's Fukushima. They're emaciated. Go check it out. We've been covering it for years and years and years. For years and years and years and years and years to come, unfortunately, until they're all gone. It's been increased since 2016, long before any offshore wind farms. And 5 years after Fukushima started decimating the food chain. It looks like some of these whales have been hit by vessels because they're floating around easy targets. 7 dead whale washes up in the same region in a month. 21-foot orca whale beached in Florida after getting beached. Dead in Florida after getting beached. He looks emaciated, but we can't get a good shot of him. Yeah, maybe. Let me see. Yeah, he's definitely not looking good at all. Lost his life. He was alive when it came ashore. There you go. That's an emaciated whale. For sure. Not half emaciated. That's emaciated. Huge 12-foot whale found dead on the banks of a river. And that's another story we've been covering for the last 4, 5, 6 years. Is clusters of whales going up rivers. Fresh water. And that's desperation, right? Their habitat is not able to... the radiation has sterilized the ocean. Like normally under the microscope, there'd be like a glass of salt water is 1 billion creatures. 75 to 100 million of the phytoplankton, the basis of the food chain, the oxygen chain, the carbon sequestration chain. But the whale they're picking up there is emaciated. That's whatever that picture happens to be of. That's not a 12-foot whale. That's a lot bigger than 12 foot. Washed up on the banks of a British river. And in Britain, we've seen that quite a bit, but only post-Fukushima, not pre-Fukushima. When any whales, there's over 5,000 have died down there in the last 8 years or something. Certain fish are discovered that must be reported whether they're dead or alive. They're classified as... royal fish. Prince Charles owns all dead whales that wash up by proxy. They usually steal certain. They look for vomit because it's worth a lot of money in the perfume industry, for instance, right? They don't want you to get it, so they'll say if you go near it, you'll get sick and die. And only the royal family is allowed to recover a dead animal on the coastline. So you are truly a slave if you live in that environment. Environment group calls attention to spike in whales death, looking for explanations and help from the federal government. So they're going to give you the environmental groups that blame you for the whales deaths, right? They won't ask no questions, because that group won't mention Fukushima. So, dead whale washed ashore across the tri-state areas. When a fin whale washed ashore, now they're normally a skinny type whale, but that one's emaciated for sure. But they're generally a pretty thin-looking whale, the fin whales. It wasn't a natural thing and hasn't been killed by interference from man. Well, you can't smell radiation or see it or hear it or feel it or touch it. Global pollinator losses causing 500,000 early deaths a year, saying 500,000 people die each year because of the pollinators are declined, the bees and the insect decline meant reduced yields of healthy food like fruits and vegetables and increased diseases in people. Like, you can have all the healthy fruit and vegetables you want in Canada, but you're probably not going to find it because the shelves are full of GMO. 96% of the food in our supermarkets are GMO in Canada. They're food with a patent that shouldn't exist, that has toxins and dioxins and formaldehyde engineered into the DNA of the food. A Mother from America study on corn on the cob, natural corn on the cob, versus man-made GMO corn on the cob, was you had to eat 425 GMO corn on the cob to get the same amount of potassium, magnesium, iron, and everything else you got from a single organic corn on the cob. And you had to eat 425 corn on the cob to get the same nutrition as a single organic corn on the cob. So, eating a single GMO corn on the cob, they said, you got more nutrition licking a stamp from the glue than you did from eating the GMO big old beautiful corn on the cob. Try making that one up. 3/4 of crops require pollinators, but the population of many insects are in freefall. The inadequate pollinators, the result has caused you 3 to 5% loss of fruit, vegetables, nut production. Don't eat anything from Ukraine. Ukraine was the biggest producer of wheat worldwide. The lower consumption of the food means about 1% of all deaths worldwide can be attributed to pollinator loss, scientists say. Heart diseases, strokes, diabetes, cancers, these are all things from eating radioactive food, by the way. All can be reduced with a healthier diet. Well, GMO is not a healthy diet or anything close to it. The study is first, but it's the cheapest food in the supermarket, see? The study is the first to quantify the human death toll of insufficient wild pollinators. It's one of the strangest studies I've ever heard. It's obviously the cover story, where they're trying to blame lots of pollinators for heart diseases, strokes, diabetes, and cancers, instead of the proliferation of GMO and anthropogenic radioactive food shipped from the nuclear wasteland. A critical missing piece in biodiversity discussion has been a lack of direct linkages to human health. A critical missing piece of the discussion. So why did they even publish it? The estimate numbers of deaths is conservative, the scientists say. And this is coming out of the UK, so there's no credibility at all. Globally, we consume too much of the wind pollinated crop like wheat, rice, corn, and barley, rich in carbs but low in nutrition, leading to an epidemic of obesity. And obesity rates doubled in Japan within 1 year of Fukushima, which is a sign of radiation brain damage. But that's going to be true too for the animals and mammals and stuff like that. And that's not going to show up in the statistic because they don't go to doctors. SeaWorld releases additional details about the killer whale found dead on a Florida beach. The first time since 1956, a killer whale is stranded on the Florida coast. Again, we're seeing killer whales everywhere else are emaciated. No sign the whale was pregnant, no sign of human interaction or trauma. And you can't really get... Well, the whale doesn't look very thick, but we are seeing them starving for the last decade, right? Beach sperm whale lays in the surf, and that one's emaciated. People stay 200 feet away for safety reasons. Large gashes on the whale. Said he believed cuts came from a ship strike. It's not clear if it happened before or after on the Oregon coast. Well, there's a mortality event along that coastline for these whales. And some of them are going to get struck because they're floating around on the ocean like a big target, right? Feds research whale mystery after more than a dozen dead whales wash up along the East Coast. Again, 20 marine mammals from 5 species. So 5 different species. It's likely a variety of human activities must be responsible. Yeah, of course it is. It has to be humans. 5 different species. Deaths have been unusually high for years, with an upward trend in deaths along the East Coast, because the Atlantic is now infested with anthropogenic man-made radioactive fallout. You can't say for certain how many whales died. You can only count animals that strand. And so for everyone you find, you assume 10 sank or 9 sank. New York, a sperm whale and humpback. New Jersey, a sperm whale, 4 humpback whales. 3 humpback whales. Critically endangered North Atlantic right whale. Causes of death include boat strikes. They name boat strikes, but clearly the whales are showing up emaciated all over the coastline. Like that one. That's pretty clear emaciation. Severe emaciation. A dead humpback whale washes up onto an island. Experts wonder why. I always get sick to my guts when I hear the experts wonder why. Found the 13th dead whale to be found along the central Atlantic coast in the last couple of weeks. 13th. Again, they talk, right? Vessel strikes. 7 dead whales have been found along the coast of New York and New Jersey. Look, there used to be more ships on the ocean. There's not as many, right? The big fleets have now basically sold their licenses back to the government or to big industry. 4 dead whales have been found during the same period in North Carolina. 1 found in Virginia Beach, according to Crazy NOAA. The death comes part of an unusual mortality event. Since 2016, 178 dead whales. But see, if you don't read the rest of the story, almost every story will try to blame it on boat strikes. And then as you read the story, you realize that's not going on at all. Humpbacks can live as long as 90 years. Well, not anymore. Recently, they're starting to follow prey to shallow water, which I documented on some of the research expeditions along the coastlines of Canada. And it was unusual, but you can see the pictures and videos that I took, the whales weren't doing good. The majority of the dead humpbacks in recent years were juveniles, which is not necessarily true, but it's a terrifying thought that the next generations are not surviving. Japan sells dead whale pieces in vending machines. Japan doesn't have a conscience at all. They don't care about nothing. They don't even care about themselves or their own country. They're still shipping food out of the nuclear wasteland. And Canada is one of the biggest buyers of it. Canada was buying it for the first decade when nobody else would buy it. Everything was shipped to Canada. Canada removed all restrictions on the 14 prefectures that were banned by 55 countries in Japan for a decade. Canada had no restrictions after 93 days. They couldn't ship it anywhere in Japan, only to Canada. And that's why Canada is one big cesspool of diseases now. Selling whale skin, frozen whale meat, canned, cooked whale pieces in vending machines. Japan's crazy. Japan used to sell children's used panties in vending machines. What kind of society does that? Polar bear attacked victim's young mother and a 1-year-old son. Because we've covered a story over the last few years of polar bears showing up emaciated, and videos, horrific videos of emaciated polar bears. The apex predator. A polar bear chased several residents, caught the mother and the son, 1-year-old. And another member of the community finally shot it and killed it. But we covered a lot of stories of emaciated polar bears, and we've covered news stories where they suggested 3,000 of the northern Canadian polar bears were emaciated. Again, we're not sure if the attack is related to the climate change. Like, the police pull you over and ask you why you're speeding, all you got to do is say climate change. If you're late for the wedding, all you do is say climate change, and you're okay. Get out of jail free card, climate change. Polar bear at the top of the food chain see humans as a food source. A patrol operates mainly in the winter to protect kids walking to and from school. Yeah. But now we're seeing desperation, right? Alaska mother and son killed in the first fatal polar bear attack in 30 years. They tried to scare the bear away with shovels, but the bear wasn't having anything. It's just sad. And it appeared the mother and toddler had no idea because of low visibility. They bioaccumulated radiation, and we've done research. So the whole coastline is stripped. Now, I had a bear stalk me when I was on research expeditions, and the bear was really skinny, and it swam out to an island and ran across the island to get at me. I got out of the way just in time. Just a matter of 30 seconds or something like that. I was back in the boat and moving off the shoreline, right? But it came looking for him to eat me or Zoe. Crustacean die-off. We cannot wash our hands in the North Sea. So the North Sea of the United Kingdom, they're watching huge die-offs, all kinds of species, tidal zone species washing up dead. 50 miles of the North Sea coast, die-offs as recently as last month. So there's dredging from the old nuclear facility going off there, right? And the nuclear sediment is supposed to be contaminated heavily with radiation. And so by dredging it, you're liberating it back into the environment. And they're trying to blame it on anything but the dredging. They don't even want to look at it, don't want to consider it. Hands off, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans says fishermen cannot collect dead mackerel on beaches for bait. Must be left to rot. So here in Newfoundland, we had a die-off, a couple of them, in the last short while, of mackerel washing up on the coastline. An abnormality. Untold hundreds, and there's different reports were showing up. Hundreds of thousands of pounds. Hundreds of thousands of pounds. So we're talking about a lot. And locals weren't allowed to recover it. Skippers, who don't know nothing about the die-offs, speculated they froze in the drop of water temperatures. But that's only applicable to the surface, right? So they don't live at the surface. it's silly to suggest that's what it is, but the media was happy to regurgitate that narrative. But that was a big die-off. There was no obvious signs of hemorrhaging or any kind of other stuff. And so one reason could be hypoxia, because the radiation kills the oxygen producers in the ocean. But it was definitely an unusual event. And it's in line with a lot of these unusual events that we're seeing. And so this was multiple places, quite a distance. When you start looking at it on a map, there's quite a few different places, right? So this is a very large area. This is not like it's isolated to a small area. And this is in the time of the year where the oxygen is supposed to be rich in, or the ocean is supposed to be rich in oxygen at that time of year. Another fisherman is complaining, he says, well, if there's enough to wash ashore, they should increase our quotas. But not being, they put that there to cause the descent, right? In 2005, they were allowed to get 55,000 tons. In 2019, was only 8,000 tons. And now they're basically saying if they harvest it, they can't recover it. Which is still 17 million pounds. That's a huge number. It used to be 121 million pounds. TFO scientists. I just really disrespect people who won't look at the full story. Mackerel can live up to 20 years. I didn't realize that. They can live 20 years. So they have to be pretty robust creatures to live for 20 years in that environment. But the DFO found very few of the dead herring were older than 6 or 7 years. So you're talking about mackerel, you're talking about a species that lives for 20 years, but they found only a few older than 6 or 7. So did they stop reproducing? And this is that one of the last generations. Because that's a really interesting. They didn't find like really young and really old. They found them between 6 and 7 years old, which 6 or 7 years ago was basically, that was a catastrophic time. Now you had multiple years of fallout. You would expect to see something like that show up. And this was all over the place, the province. It wasn't just a small area. This was over the whole province where they seen that. Decisions on the use of dead mackerels washing up on the shores of Newfoundland questionable. So there was a lot of controversy over that. Again, they were 5 and 6 years old, but that's a species that lives to be. So you should have found a full range of babies, and not babies, but 1 year or 2 year old, all the way up to 40 years old in those samples, because you're talking about a couple of 100,000 pounds. You're talking about a large area, so you would expect to find some diversity of species. Similar, we're seeing hundreds of striped bass washed up dead in northern Cape Breton. And this is headlines I collected since late last year, basically. And we just never got around to doing the story because we got so many other things going on. And usually you're doing about 6 or 7 of these stories a year. And I'm still paying attention, but there's so much you can't keep up on it. He tried the fisheries in Nova Scotia, the striped bass, were trying to blame it on a sudden temperature change in the ocean. Now, he showed up in multiple stories claiming that the sudden temperature change in the ocean, but he'd done that over several years. I went back a couple of years on this fishery and ocean guy. He was quoted in the media, and he done the same thing. Oh, it was probably, it it was cold weather, so they probably died because of the cold weather. But that doesn't matter to the marine life. The temperature stays the same in the ocean all year long. Once you get below the surface, right, the temperature is the same. That's why they call it a sink, right, because it's consistent. So he was quoted in a number of stories about thousands of the striped bass in Nova Scotia dying, and he had the same narrative each time. And that was a dishonest narrative. Whales die after beaching themselves in Paphos. In Cyprus, is it? Official record of 4 whale strandings on the west coast. That's not a very healthy looking, that's not like a thick whale. A goosebeak whale, they're deep water whales, with 3 other whales of the same species. And later saying more were found in the same area. I think it was 7 or 8. Bear with me. And because we had so much material to get through tonight, yesterday was such a tough day, and today and tonight was a tough day to get through all of these. God, put everything in get everything in order. It was just a nightmare. 18 whales have been found dead along the east coast. I'm trying to get through as much of it as I can. I'm not paying attention to anything. NOAA says boat strikes entanglements most likely to blame. So 18 whales, and NOAA, right? We've covered them 1,000 times probably in the last 6 or 7 years alone. We caught them lying so many times, at some point they should be charged with crimes against humanity. $18 whales in the last number of weeks. They're trying to blame it on your tin cans, pop bottles, and everything else. Why are so many whales getting stranded on U.S. beaches? Well, because of radioactive fallout from Japan. Nearly 24 whales have been unbeached on the U.S. Atlantic coast in the east, on the Atlantic Ocean here, in the past 3 months. And they're trying to blame it on windmills. They're trying to blame it on noise pollution, everything, despite the fact that these die-offs have been going on now for 8 or 9 years, and it's consistently throughout it, they're emaciated. But all of a sudden, they're saying the avian flu jumped all species, it's killing the elephants and everything else. It killed the dinosaurs, Dana. Extraordinary footage shows rare whale grave at the bottom of the Antarctic Ocean. Again, this wasn't a whale grave. I've dove on whale graves, right up in Conception Bay. They used to herd the whales up on the beaches and kill them and use them for mink food for the rich mink farmers to make fur coats. So the fishermen would go out and herd the whales up on the beaches. And then a lot of whales would rot, so they would tow them out and they would sink there. So there was thousands of whale carcasses in this one area. I dove on it years ago. Got to go back there maybe this year and get a lot of footage with the submersible. It's not a rare whale grave. It's just a whale. So like a lot, where all the whale factories were too. I dove a lot of those sites on the East Coast years ago, decades ago, and out in front of the old whale factories. They done the same thing where they had a lot of fin whales and blue whales and other whales they towed out that they couldn't process and let it sink whole. And I actually went down and picked sea urchins on it, a number of whales for days at a time, which the Japanese, by the way, didn't like. Untouched whale graveyard captured in eerie photo. You're all alone. Again, This is whales that were sunk there on purpose after harvest. Footage of an extremely rare whale with 2 dorsal fins poses a mystery. No, that's called a mutation. We're expecting to see lots of that in the near future. That's crazy, isn't it? A whale with multiple fins growing out of his back. Thank you, Fukushima. Female orcas can't have babies, so now they're stealing other babies. Living with radiation. So this is a person who knows nothing about radiation, pretending that he does. And they only acknowledge cancer, they play it right down. That's not supposed to be there. That's supposed to be in the other news cycle, so we'll just move on. 14 pilot whales stranded in Sri Lanka. That's a bad spot to die if you're a whale. And so pilot whales got, since Fukushima, a reputation for mass strandings. Because they're very close, right? But pre-2016, the mass strandings for polar whales were blamed on starvation, including New Zealand, including Australia, and everywhere else. After 2015, rather, because the Paris Accord, there was a narrative that went out all of a sudden that any whales, polar whales in particular, mass stranding, was to try to blame it, say it was normal. But if this was normal, we would have a long record. Experts don't know why it took place. 10-foot pygmy sperm whale washes ashore in Indian Atlantic. I'm not sure did they mention. It's the second most common whale or dolphin species washes up dead in southeastern United States is the pygmy sperm whale. Well, to my knowledge, that's not true. It's the gray whale and the humpback. After spat of whale deaths, 3 dolphins die on Sandy Hook. We're almost through this tonight. Might as well keep going and finish it out, I guess. Global algae blooms are growing. They're worldwide. We're seeing these algae blooms because there's nothing to contain it, see? And this is not domoic acid now, but the oceans have been absorbing 90% of all the excess heat trapped in the climate system. Again, that's not how the ecosystem works. Yeah, the ocean is a heat sink. The ocean maintains its temperature. The heat that's trapped below the clouds, when the clouds are removed, the heat escapes back into space. What they're trying to imply is that the ocean is capturing all the heat. But it doesn't work that way. All of the excess heat trapped in the climate system. Climate system is the artificial clouds they're doing, which was to melt the Arctic so that they can do gas, oil, and minerals up there, right? People think that chemtrailing is not real. They forget that they chemtrailed Vietnam for 9 years straight and defoliaged every tree in the country. Do you really think they got rid of that technology? They used to make it rain over the Ho Chi Minh Trail for an extra 2 months during the monsoons, the British and Americans. Dead whales keep washing ashore in New Jersey, and experts have no idea why. That one's emaciated. Whales are turning up dead on beaches. Is our online shopping addictions partly to blame? Again, right, you see so many facets of the spectrum where they weaponize the whale's death as an opportunity to attack you. Not trying to flush out what's going on, they're just trying to attack you. Anti-wind farm petitions take off. Near 250,000 signatures. That's an emaciated whale. If wind farms were killing the whales, it would be happening worldwide. Instead of doing wind farms, you should be doing geothermal. Why wouldn't you do geothermal? It works 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Claims about offshore wind farms killing whales are unsubstantiated. Yeah, that's because the whales are emaciated. It's about the distraction, right? It's about disinformation. Peru with 3,500 dead sea lions that were all emaciated. And we showed you that at the beginning, all the pictures of that. 50 dead ducks in a town is a mystery. It's not the bird flu. Hundreds of dead fish washed ashore in Florida beaches. So even little headlines, stuff like that will make headlines. So, but when you get a big event, you say, oh no, it's normal, but it's not, right? End of the world fears as the birds overwhelms the streets. That's the only story that I put in there. It has nothing to do with Fukushima as far as I know. That's just a normal thing. Because we've covered stories like this before. I played a video a while back of probably 1,000 to 1,500 starlings out in front of my place. And when they all got up and flew away at one time, it was deafening, the amount of noise all those little tiny wings make. But you know what that means? That means we made it. Bit of a struggle sometimes getting through so much information. Just putting it all together, you don't really want to do a show. Once you put everything together and you got to wait for an hour or two to do the show, you run out of energy, right? But yesterday, you know, I've still got adrenaline from the expeditions that we were on yesterday. Was wow. That was wow stuff. Bear with me here. I wanted to run through it tonight. Not run through it, but try to articulate that there's another narrative that's applicable to the majority of the die-offs that is purposely being missing from the equation. So we went down yesterday, and what we found is a completely different story than what the media is telling you. And I was hoping the species had escaped. They didn't. But there was some found their way out, because you can see how close that dolphin is to that one's back. The Harvey is backing out. So you can see, right, that some of them would definitely get out of there. But I couldn't wrap my mind around why they were all up on the beach when there was enough water, which was slush, that they could have hung out in. And the ocean wasn't that far away, and they could have went along the shoreline and got out if they really wanted to. And that they know where the ocean is too, and that they're not stupid. And that when they were in the open water, they could have jumped 30 feet in the air, which is what they can do, and they would have seen the open ocean and could have made their way out there, even if their echolocation failed them. And instead of being a dozen, there was actually around 30 whales. It wasn't pack ice, and the whole bay wasn't full of ice. It wasn't like they were deep in the bay and it was miles and miles. But I was happy to see the Coastguard. I was happy to see some of the boats headed that, Dolphins headed that way. I was happy to see 62 votes, and with a stunning 98% of the people agreed Fukushima nuclear meltdowns, endless radioactive fallout is behind the mass extinctions that is worldwide. It's worldwide because the radioactive fallout is worldwide. This is 19.5 days. The plume didn't stop coming out even today. It's a continuous plume. It's not like there's a little puff and plume is floating along. This is a continuous emissions, a continuous plume that at 19.5 days, and think of it as an invisible snowstorm. Or think of it as a snowstorm that after 19 days, the whole planet is covered in a snowstorm and it never stops for millions and millions of years, except it's invisible and pulses energy almost at the speed of light. And it does that for millions of years. It never goes away, and you can't destroy it. And think about all the research expeditions and the evidence from those research expeditions. Was it worth losing all the species to pretend that nuclear had some redeeming qualities, or was carbon free, or had some benefit? Because it doesn't. The reason the species are dying and disappeared was because radiation followed from Japan. It's an extinction event. If you made it this far, consider giving me a thumbs up on the video. Thank you, everybody. Hugs for everybody. Hope everybody has a great day and a great night. And if you made it this far, consider donating. You cover some of the expenses from yesterday, and I can't keep up with the expenses that we got gathered up since YouTube took down my other channel with 24,000 subscribers. And hugs for everybody. Everybody have a great night, a great day tomorrow. We'll see everybody on the next show. We got I got 8 shows ready to go. The show tomorrow night is going to be on the Fukushima headlines from the anniversary that I've been gathering up over the last 4 or 5 days. And I got a whole show on Fukushima headlines from the last 4 to 5 days to cover. Hopefully it'll be less than a 2-hour show, but we got 8 shows ready to go. And I can't wait to kick the shit out of the nuclear industry every day. I can't wait till another month when I'm healthy, because I'm getting a lot healthier. I see James Lucid shipped us a donation. Bless your heart, my friend. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. It was quite the show tonight. My apologies for such a long show. But details. Well, that's 2 hours and 45 minutes. I apologize. I was going to make it 3 hours, but I decided not to check the time because I start hurrying things, right? Good night, everybody. Hugs for everybody. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. We'll keep it within a reasonable show tomorrow night. I'll be covering major nuclear news. Have a great night. We'll see everybody quick enough here. Take care.